Hello, this is Graham Parker, and you're listening to Retrospectives with John Broughton on KC Radio 97.7 FM.
You get nostalgic for those mid-70s, late 70s days?
That's funny, because some guy called me the other day who was writing a book about Dylan and the Blackbush Festival, which I played with the Rumour in 1979.
That's right.
And I think it was the biggest crowd Dylan's ever played to, certainly the biggest crowd I've ever played to. And I thought about that and thought about some of the little clubs I'm playing now and thought, well, that would be a blast, wouldn't it? Playing to an audience, you know. but you know, if I'm on stage and it's a good gig, it doesn't matter, you know. I mean, I keep moving forward. So, you know, it's nice to have some memories. But those days, a lot of the time, I was, you know, losing my voice a lot more, and I didn't really know how to sing. I screamed, really, you know. I enjoy what I'm doing much more now. Making records is much easier, especially since I've been producing them myself. It's much easier without a producer who always seem to cause problems, really, and do things the hard way. You know, as long as I can keep writing songs and surprising myself, it doesn't really come back to me that much, you know.
Did it sit okay with you at the time, being lumped in with all those punk new wave acts that were happening?
Well, in 1976, they weren't happening. You know, it was a bit of a void. We were in a field of one, really, and that was good in some ways, but bad in others. In as much as we didn't have an audience, you know, nobody really understood it until 1977, when a lot of bands came along doing 3.5-minute songs at high speeds. You know, we didn't have much of an audience, and our audience increased because of the so-called punk and new wave thing, and to be lumped in with that was okay by me, because suddenly we were playing in 2,000 seaters instead of pubs, you know. You know, it didn't, it was, you know, it wasn't detrimental, really, I don't think.
Now, Howl and Wind is probably one of my favourite albums of all time, and I probably consider it one of the great debuts of all time. Do you feel a real confidence with that album once you had it down that you'd started off with something special there?
Yeah, I thought all the songs were very strong, and at that time, I guess I was making it in late 75, and it came out sometime in 76. At that time, there was still the kind of sensibility of whereby making a record was, you know, a group would go in with 3 songs and jam the rest, you know, and that wasn't my idea at all. My idea was to do something like the Stones and the Beatles used to do, which was, you know, every song would be good and, you know, written beforehand, and you know, I knew where I was going in every direction with each song, and it came out really strong, and it was amazing to work with professional musicians for the first time in my life in a real studio, my first album. So, you know, I had no doubts about it at all. I thought it was great.
At what point do you think that the combination of yourself and the Rumour became the band that you really wanted it to be, that it hit the point? I mean, most people would say Squeezing Out Sparks. Would that be right with you too?
Yeah, I think so, because you know, we were showing less influences on that album. It was a unique album, and you know, especially touring behind that album, the band were amazing. I mean, it was a really high-powered rock and roll band by then, and you know, they'd lost a lot of the kind of more good time sort of feel that we had on some of the early records, which was nice, but you know, it was a bit derivative, and Squeezing Out Sparks had a certain uniqueness to it, I think, and I think that's when we really hit our stride, definitely.
Now, I believe you uncovered some long-lost demos recently on a trip to England. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, well, because I'm involved with the official GP website now, which some guy started some years ago, one of the questions is, you know, do you have spare tracks, and why don't you put something out and just sell it on the internet? So I got inspired by this idea, and basically I knew I had a few things in the can with, you know, me and various musicians, not many songs, maybe about half a dozen, but I also knew I'd done some demos of songs that didn't make it to albums. Just me and guitar and a few overdubs that I'd done myself in little studios. And I basically discovered a bag full of cassettes in my attic in London, and then I called up a storage facility that keeps some of my gear and asked him if he had any tapes of mine, and he had everything there on quarter-inch tape. So the record's done, and it's been mastered, and the cover's done, and it should be on sale, I think March the 15th we're going for, and I'm using Razor and Tie's website, my last record company, Razor and Tie, to sell it on exclusively on the internet.
Oh, tremendous.
Yeah, so it's called Loose Monkeys, Spare Tracks and Lost Demos, and it's on my own record label, which is called Up Yours Records, distributed by Razor and Tie. And there's 20 songs on there, and it's going to be an interesting experiment to see whether anybody bothers, you know. I've never actually bought anything on the internet, and but I know people who do. People buy records, and this is the only way you're going to get this for at least a few years, maybe 5 years, you know. It depends on how well it does before I let Razor and Tide put it out to stores. And so, you know, this is like a bit of the wave of the future here. A lot of people who don't sell a lot of records actually just do this. They make a record and sell it on the internet, period,
Yeah.
And at gigs, you know. And the way the market is now, you know, it's possible that this will be the wave of the future, with record companies cutting down the amount of acts and throwing them out after one record. You know, it's instant. You don't have to go to the store and ask somebody who wants to sell you a Metallica record, you know.
It does seem to be the trend, and for the artists, I guess it means they don't have to sell as many records to make the same kind of money they were making previously.
Well, exactly. The whole thing with a record deal is that usually you get 14% of nothing, you know. I mean, that's what it amounts to, you know. The nice thing about it is that they're a bank. They give you an advance, and if you can wheedle out 15,000 tour support, you can get a band in a tour bus and tour, you know. But people, record companies can't even afford to do that so much these days, so you end up playing solo anyway. So, you know, this is definitely a way to go, because you can make much more profit out of fewer sales, and it's time to, you know, unfortunately face reality and realize that people aren't interested in this music, you know. They just, you know, the live music scene is pretty much eviscerated. Small clubs and stuff, you can have great acts on and 50 people come in a 500-seater. It's the first time in the history when agents are wondering, you know, what the hell will happen next when they put a band on the road. They don't know if they're going to stiff or what, even if they've got a fairly successful record. So, you know, it's definitely something to look at, that maybe you should just sell to the people who want it and not bother with the rest, you know.
One thing that's really highlighted your recent albums is the more stripped-back sound that's been on there. Are there any of the older albums or older songs in particular that you feel would really benefit from being redone with that kind of treatment?
Well, I think some of the 80s albums, particularly the, I guess, Another Grey Area, Real McCaw, and Steady Nerves, are not my favourite records. I was actually listening to a song from Steady Nerves the other day, a song called Mighty Rivers, because there's one guy, I think he's in New Jersey, and he always shouts out Mighty Rivers whenever I'm playing, and I've never ever done it. I've done it in the studio once, and I think, you know, the production of it got heavy-handed and overblown, you know, and too compressed and sort of gussied up into something that it wasn't, and it could have been a much more lighter, gentler, kind of easier, sweeter kind of song. That's what it was meant to be. And you know, I think that the way I produce songs on my records, I really do what the song dictates, which is the way it always should be. That was the way Squeezing Out Sparks was done. It was done in 11 days, and the producer said, why are the band playing all this stuff? Why don't they play the song, you know? And I said, great, you know, tell them to do it. You're the producer, you know. And since then, producing for me, when I started producing my own albums in 88 with Mona Lisa's Sister, and they're not all stripped-down records, I wouldn't say that. They're all different, I think, you know, texture-wise and sound-wise, but I think I try to do the best by the song, as opposed to, okay, modern production dictates that it should be like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think, you know, some of those things could have benefited from what I do now.
There have been a lot of cases of artists covering your songs over the years. Are there any that mean the most to you, and are there any artists that you'd like to see cover your songs?
Well, that's a good question, because I was... on the website, people were often asking me about my favourite covers by people who've done my songs, and I said, you shouldn't be asking me that, you should be asking me who would like to do my songs. And then the next lot of questions I get, some guy says, so Graham, who would you like to do your songs? And my answer was, now we're getting somewhere, now you're really using my brain. Now you're using my head, I think I said to him, and I went a complete blank and sat there and couldn't really. All I could think of was Gladys Knight and Mavis Staples,
Yeah.
That's about it, But I'll take anything that comes. It's always flattering that somebody goes through the trouble to do it, Whether it's somebody well known like Rod the Mod just did a song on his last album, or the tribute album that this little label in New Jersey did with mostly acts that you've never heard of. Mostly they were on his record label, people from New Jersey, But it's still gratifying, I think, to know that songs. I never envisaged really in 1976 that my songs would have any life other than about 6 months. That was the length you think an album would be out there and then finished, and then you'd have to try and make another album, and then you'd kind of, after 3 albums, you'd disappear in a country somewhere and go to sleep for the rest of your life, So I never really envisaged songs going on in that way, and other people doing them, and I wish there'd be more done, I really do, but I think the lyrics are often a little challenging for most of the people who you would think would cover one of my songs. That's probably a problem with it,
Have you ever consciously sat down and written a song with another artist in mind?
Often I start off songs and I think this is in that kind of area, but usually it's more like genres as opposed to artists. Usually I'm writing something and I think, okay, this is Motown, It's more like that, or this is very Staxy or Stonesy or Dylan-y, But I don't. If somebody asked me, I might try. I mean, they have done in the past. Various people have said to me, "Oh, you got to write a song for me." And for some reason, I've been real lazy about it. But I think these days I might have a crack at it. I might take it more seriously. But it's certainly something I don't sort of aspire to do particularly. Somehow along the line, it just turns out to be my song is what happens.
Now, the general consensus is that you haven't had a lot of luck with record companies over the years. If you were responsible for the promotion of your work in the past, how would you have handled things differently than the record companies you've been involved with? This is a mythology, really, in a way that I've sort of helped foster as well, because I wrote that song "Mercury Poisoning," of course. Mm-hmm. So that kind of sets the precedent for this. But when I think about the fact that I've been with labels even into the 90s, I was on RCA, a major label in America, for 4 albums, and you look at what's happening now, where a band gets usually 1 album. And if they don't sell enough, then they're out. I think I've just heard that some big labels like Mercury just cut 130 acts from their roster. Wow.
So I don't think it's been that bad for me. I mean, my main problem was the fact that I signed with Phonogram for my first albums, and Mercury is their American branch, and the company was pretty much staffed by people who were a great deal older, and they were quite happy with their back catalogue and their Elvis Presley stuff or whatever the hell they were selling. I don't know what they had, Rod Stewart albums or something, and stuff that had sold. And in those days, you could, a record was continually selling because there wasn't the competition and people weren't looking for something new. They had no idea that something new would come along, and if they did, they didn't want to hear it, So record companies could survive then on stuff that had sold well years ago. So they didn't really do anything with GP in the Room, or we played in America 2 tours in 76, and Mercury basically ignored us, really, because they just didn't think we had any chance anyway. So that was really a bad start for us, I think, and that's the kind of legend that hangs over me. But the reality is I've stolen a lot of money from record companies. That's the name of the game.
the public's perception of you as an artist has perhaps hindered your recent sales? I mean, some of your recent albums stand up as some of the best of your career, but do you think that people still have a mindset of you as this 70s new wave star and not willing to open up to the more newer work?
Well, yeah, it's a lot of things. I think that if the audience that used to buy my records are my age or similar to my age, somewhere near it, they're like me and they don't buy records anyway. I mean, I'm not really interested that much. It's very rare for me to say I've got to buy that record. It's not the most important part of my life. So it's understandable, and unfortunately, with that kind of ongoing recognition with a lot of people, you have to have had a lot of hit singles, really. Like you otherwise you disappear, and then you're only reaching the hardcore people who know that your stuff is still good, and that's by definition going to be a smaller amount, I think a lot of the attitude is, well, he was good then. He can't possibly be good now, and it doesn't matter what. Even if they hear something, they're going to think that. People make their own minds up, and I'm guilty of that as well. I mean, I bought John Prine's first album, and I've never bought anything since, and I still know the guy's good, But it meant something to me in 1975 or whenever it was. It doesn't mean anything to me now,
Yeah. Now you're based in New York now. How long have you been there for?
Well, let's see, I was in New York City for quite a few years, in Manhattan, which was quite exciting, but I've always had a place in London, so still get to stay there. I was there most of last summer, and I've been, this place since 1988. This is in the Catskill Mountains here. I'm looking out at the snow right now, and waiting for the deer to make an appearance out of the forest, So I spend a lot of time here. It's a very, very beautiful place, and very extreme seasons. Never boring.
How would you sum up your relationship with American audiences in comparison to back home in England?
Well, if you get a good room of people, it's always the same anywhere to me now. It's a good thing. There's just more fans here, I think. They just stayed with me longer. In the 80s when I made those records, I think that I was talking about earlier, and say Another Grey Area, Steady Nerves, Real McCaw, England basically they clobbered me for those records very hard, and as soon as the critics hit me, the public disappeared with it. But in America that didn't happen. They still respected the albums for what they were, and they didn't all get the greatest reviews, but some of those records sold better than some of my earlier records, which were better, which were better records, really stronger and more interesting, really. But Americans don't seem to think that. They seem to find something good in what I've done. I mean, I meet people whose favorite album is The Real McCaw. That's when they first heard me, because I was still getting quite good coverage and airplay, and getting into the top 50 at least, which now would be is quite an achievement for any band. The sales being what they are. So that's where America's been good to me, I think.
Now, I believe you didn't do a lot of touring last year. Are there plans afoot to get back on the road again this year? And if so, will it be more solo or with a band?
Well, for this Loose Monkeys internet album, I'm going to be just playing solo, yeah. It suits what I'm doing, I think. I can do a variety of material without losing my shirt, which is what taking a band on the road is if you play clubs these days,
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to do, in fact, I'm going to do a gig next week around here, and then I'm going back to London, as a matter of fact, to do a show, one-off show. And in May, I'm going to be doing some solo gigs in various places in America, various parts of the States, here and there. Nothing much, and I'll do a month of work and then stop and enjoy the summer. And I think I'm going to do the Edmonton Festival in Canada, which is a big event in August. So, nothing really, hewn into rock, really, just some dates.
Do you feel your on-stage persona varies between playing solo or with a band? Are you a different person when you're solo?
Well, yeah, the solo thing has allowed me to enjoy what I do more. It's allowed me to interact with the audience more, because in my 20s, I was much more uptight, and the whole idea was to get people dancing. I mean, if people didn't stand up by the second number, GP in the room, or we were in a panic, we started playing everything faster and faster. It got so fast that it made the Clash sound like James Taylor. I mean, we were furious and frenetic, and that's not really enjoyable to me. It's playing solo is definitely paced my act a lot more. It's a lot broader and a lot more fun, and that also translates to playing with a band now. I enjoy it more, and I can relax a little bit and say a few words and communicate as a human being, as opposed to being some kind of frenzied robot. So it's much more enjoyable, and solo is the greatest way to use your voice. It really is.
The impression you're not a real studio hand. You're not entirely happy or comfortable in the studio environment. What would it be about the studio that you don't like?
Well, I'm not uncomfortable, but I like to get things done, and studios can be tedious places. So they're great places to get out of for me. Some guys can sit there and just put their head in the board and tweak around with something for endless amounts of time. But I just find that it just sends me to sleep, and it usually is a detriment to the song in the end. I've seen producers do that with my albums, and I've had enough of that. When I make a record now, we rehearse for 4 days or something, and it seems so simple. You can get a track down. Usually the first day there's a bit of a crisis. The drums sound like made out of cardboard for the first hour, and then you put your heads together and come up with a way to mic them that really works, and then bang, you record 3 songs, and usually I get them first, second take, where they really are fresh, and that's the way to get them, and then I just sort of do a few overdubs and build the song up, and try to get out in a couple of weeks, really.
Now, I believe you've done some short story novel writing in recent times. How does this process compare to you to the songwriting process?
Well, yeah, I've been writing a bit. I've got a novel on the back burner which I think needs extensive rewriting, because I went on and wrote a bunch of short stories after that are much better, and I've acquired a literary agent who's in the process of showing them to people, this short story collection, and also quite a few little publications, a few books, collections of different writings have asked me to do things and stuff. So, the ball is kind of slowly rolling there. It's a very frustrating game, to be taking part in something that might come out in 3 years' time. That's the thing I dislike about it. So songwriting is more instant to me and more fun. But writing fiction, I mean, just a 20-page short story is much harder than writing a song. I mean, it's really man's work, it's another game altogether. It's, where was I a week ago? With a song, you look at it and it's right in front of you. There's a page, there's 2 pages at most, usually. And it's like, okay, the third verse is weak, I've got to work on it. Or, okay, there's 1 word in the first verse I don't like. And, it's a whole different thing to putting a story together and making it exciting and interesting and quirky and, maybe emotional as well, and carrying that through for a story and keeping people's interest. And with songs, I don't need editors, but with writing, I do. I actually hired an editor to get rid of some of the excess nonsense in some of the stories, help me tighten them up, and which has been a good learning process. Whereas with songs, I'm pretty much now at the stage where I know when I've done 1 chorus too many, or when the bridge is, unnecessary. So that's a real learning experience to try and write,
Find you have to prepare yourself differently to get yourself into a different frame of mind to tackle a project like that?
It's pretty similar. When I've been writing the short stories, I've found myself in the midst of something, and I'm carried away, and it's the same with writing a song. It's a little different writing a song because you stop and start so much, because I find that it's sometimes I'm just totally on the wrong track and I've got to stop completely. But with writing a story, I generally find that once the idea has started, my head is down and I'm in another world, for 4 or 5 pages before I come out of it, So that's quite an exciting thing, but it's hard work to get yourself there. Very hard work.
And just to finish up, Graham, is there a certain type of record or a certain style of record that you haven't yet tackled in your career that you'd like to have a go at before your days are up?
Well, I don't really feel that I need to make the kind of South American conga album or, Lambada record or something. I'm not one of those guys who feels that I need to, go to Brazil or something and use those kind of musicians. I guess I'm much more conservative, really. I'm an old rock and roller, really, the old 4/4 beat, and that's about it. But I think the record I made, 12 Haunted Episodes, which came out in 95, I guess 96.
Yeah.
That really was the record I've wanted to make for a very long time. And it came together because I just tuned my guitar to an open chord and suddenly found myself writing 12 songs that I think were quite different. And the whole feel of the record was just, absolutely the way it should have been for me. It's hard to explain, but the mood of the record and everything about it really was right. And it's got a free-flowing sensibility to it. It doesn't seem like it's stiff and locked into place like a lot of rock and roll records do with that 4/4 beat. It has a certain flow to it. Some of the tracks like Partner for Life and See Yourself, Fly, these songs have a liquid feel to them that I've never accomplished before. And I feel as though I've done that record, so now it's just a case of I've just been writing up. I've written a huge amount of songs just now. I've got a double album's worth right now sitting there, and there's 2 different directions I think on there, but they're within the typical GP scope. It's nothing outside it. They're not sort of nose flute music or anything.
Okay, Graham. Look, thanks again for your time. I really do appreciate it. I'll let you get back to the tennis there. We look forward to Loose Monkeys coming out in March on Up Yours Records. If nothing else, you're going to win the prize for the best label name of the year. You got to love that.
You got it. That's it. Yeah. Well, that's great. I hope your whole show turns out good.
I'm sure it will. Thanks again, Graham.
That's brilliant.
Okay, hope we see you down here soon.
All right, John. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.